Hey everybody, it is Natalie. Welcome to the live stream. I'm going to go ahead and get the technology in order. Thank you for being here today. And I'm going to make sure I've got everything up and running before I get going here. And let's see. I'm going to share my screen while I wait to pop up here again. Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome in. I am going to go ahead and get my screen set up here, and we will get the screen share going on. And let me just make sure I'm live here. I'm going to share my screen while I wait to. All right. We are in it. Okay, everybody, welcome to the webcast and welcome to 2024. I hope everybody is alive and well and feeling good. Welcome to another year, and thank you for being here with me on my channel. Today, we are going to look at the astrology of Rudy Giuliani. And for those of you who don't remember who he is, he's the former mayor of New York City, and he was leading the country through September 11th, when September 11th happened in the United States. And he was the mayor of New York at the time, and he was widely seen as like a huge hero and somebody who brought everyone together. He'd been in politics for years. He'd been around in New York City for years. He actually tried to run for president in 2008. It didn't work. But his name came back into the media when President Trump ran for president in 2016. And because Rudy Giuliani acted as one of his advisors and ultimately ended up being one of his attorneys. And he went from this very high stature, like everybody's looking at him like he's a great grand guy, to becoming like basically a co-conspirator and trying to overturn the election results for 2020. And most recently, and publicly humiliating himself many, many times, which we will talk about in this reading, and why I see that in his chart as far as his willingness to go to the depths of hell, basically to get his agenda through, and how he will kind of like stop at nothing, even at 70 plus years old. And he was in the news recently. I became interested in his chart because he was in the news during this last Mercury retrograde, as Mercury was retrograding in Capricorn back to Sagittarius back in December. Right in the middle of that Mercury retrograde, about a month ago, or not even a month ago, a couple of weeks ago, he was fined and assessed $148 million verdict for defamation of a couple of election workers that he was harassing back in 2020. And those election workers won a $148 million judgment against him. And he ended up having to declare bankruptcy during this Mercury retrograde. On December 21st of 2023, he declared bankruptcy. And on December 15th, he actually lost the case for $148 million. And his attorney said it was the equivalent of a death penalty for him. He's also facing charges, criminal charges in Georgia for trying to overturn the 2020 election. So this is a man who had an extremely high stature in US politics and was like America's hero, America's mayor back when September 11th happened, and now has been reduced to declaring bankruptcy and being basically the butt of the joke for the last couple of years, more than the last couple of years. Hi, Gilly. Happy New Year. Thank you so much. If you're here in the chat, you can say hello. I love to see everyone, and it's awesome if you're here and you want to say hi. And if you know who Giuliani is, share your comments, share what you think about him. I'd love to hear it. And I just have I have his picture right here, and I'm going to show you guys several pictures of him as we get started. Here's him and his buddy Donald Trump, and this is like way earlier, obviously, because Trump looks a lot younger. And Rudy Giuliani was Rudy Giuliani was his personal attorney during his presidency. And got him impeached at least one time because of the Ukraine issue. But anyway, he was Trump's personal attorney. These two go way back, way back to the time when Rudy Giuliani was mayor of New York City. And these two have known each other for quite a long time, Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani. And so you see they're together there. Here's Rudy Giuliani after 9/11, when he was knighted by the Queen of England, by Queen Elizabeth, for his heroism as a leader during 9/11. The Queen of England asked him to come to the UK, and he was knighted by the Queen of England. So this is somebody who was like highly like respected back in 2001. And this is somebody that if you had his name attached to someone, it was like attached to a business project or something. People were like, we are not worthy. We are not worthy. He's the best. He's the greatest. He's like a god walking around. He helped New York during 9/11. Like all these comments coming out about him. This is his third wife, Judith Nathan, who accompanied him to London when he was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in February of 2002. Okay, so this is a picture I'll show you guys later, but this is a picture of Rudy Giuliani dressed in drag and Donald Trump. This is from the year 2000, and this is a old, like kind of like SNL type skit that they did together where Rudy Giuliani dressed up like a woman and Donald Trump just was dressed as himself, and he was hitting on Rudy Giuliani. It was kind of a really epic skit that they did back in 2000. So anyway, we've got that. Here's Rudy Giuliani during 9/11 when September 11th happened, and here's him walking around. He was in Lower Manhattan when the buildings got hit, and he was, running around and running for his life with everyone else. The building he was in collapsed actually at the time when he was with other city officials, but he was the mayor of New York City at the time, and here he is walking the streets of New York City after September 11th. And here he is on September 11th, mayor of New York City, with George W. Bush. That's a senator. I forget which one in the background. And then a fireman, like the, I want to say like the head fireman guy, but I forget his name. I think it's Tim or Tom Vossen. But anyway, you see Rudy Giuliani there with George W. Bush. A lot of people thought back in 2001 that Giuliani actually did a better job of like leading the country than George W. Bush did at the time. So he was like super, super popular back then. And unfortunately, for those of you that like, have you guys ever seen Borat, or have you ever seen Sacha Baron Cohen? Like he does, he'll like fake interview politicians. There was a very embarrassing moment for Rudy Giuliani when he was getting, like in the year 2020, when he was getting fake interviewed by Sacha Baron Cohen, and he was caught with his pants going underneath his hands going underneath his pants with this woman here. And we'll talk more about this later and what that was. Here he is working for Trump in 2020. He's holding a press conference for Trump there. He's 70 plus years old here, and here he is. I'm going to talk about this quite a bit. This is a photo where his hair dye is like running down his face, and this is after the 2020 election. We'll talk more about that later, but everybody's like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Because he's like, bleeding hair dye all over the place. And this is an unfortunate picture from 2020 where he was in Michigan fighting to get the election overturned for Trump. And he was talking to the Michigan courts, and he had some flatulence at the time. He passed gas basically at the time that he was speaking in the Michigan courts, and he did it a couple times. And so, you can see he went from being this kind of like really celebrated figure, strong leader figure, to becoming this kind of, weird guy that defends Trump. But anyway, the next picture we have is of Rudy Giuliani when he was a young prosecutor, and he worked in the New York prosecutor. He worked for the attorney general, and he was at that time prosecuting the mob. So we see a picture of him there as a young lawyer. Here's him again as a young lawyer. Okay, we'll come back to these pictures later. And here he is right here. I'm sorry, guys, for the noise. Let me take care of that. So anyway, so those are some pictures of him. And as I mentioned, he was, a big name back in 2000 and 2001, 2002. And he tried to run for president himself, but it didn't go too well. So anyway, and down here, I just want to read a little bit where it says, in 2020, he represented Trump in many lawsuits filed in an attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election results, making false and debunked allegations about rigged voting. He also was like touting conspiracy theories at the time. And so anyway, this is Rudy Giuliani, a once an extremely bright legal mind who had an insane memory for figures and was a bulldog in the courtroom going after, the top echelons of the mob families in New York City. Rudy Giuliani was a prosecutor, a federal prosecutor who racked up over 4,000 convictions and went after all the big top 5 families in the mob. And so he went from doing that to being what he's become today. And as I mentioned, he did just declare bankruptcy because of his problems with the 2020 election and how he was basically like these 2 women who were working who were working on election day were volunteers and were counting votes. And he alleged that they were like in a conspiracy to miscount the votes. And those 2 women started, having a lot of threats and having a lot of things happen to them as a result of it. And eventually those 2 women sued him. And now he owes those women $148 million. And so now he has declared bankruptcy. So this is a really interesting man that we're looking at here. And he is in his 70s now. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at his chart. So Rudy Giuliani was born on May 28th, 1944. Okay, so he is one of the boomers. He is part of the boomer generation that has Pluto and Leo. He also has you'll notice right away, he has a Gemini sun. Let me go ahead and do my little drawings here. He has Sun in Gemini with Uranus, Sun, Uranus, and Gemini conjunction in his 10th house. He also has his ascendant at 29 degrees Virgo, and he has a Virgo ascendant conjunction Neptune right there, ascendant conjunction Neptune. He also has Chiron in the 1st house, okay? And he has a Sun Chiron square right there. His sun is squaring that Chiron in his 1st house. Okay, so just pointing out some things he has going on in his chart. When we talk about in astrology, we talk about like the big 3, or what are your rising, what's your sun, and what's your moon. So, in his case, he would be a Virgo rising, he would be a sun in Gemini, and he would be a moon in Leo. Now, one thing you'll notice right away is this huge packed stellium that he has in Leo in the 12th house. And, it's really interesting. We're going to talk about some keywords that have been used to describe him and about this 12th house stellium. Now, the 12th house is a very complicated house and it's hidden from the ascendant. So there's something going on. And one thing you guys are going to notice right away, for those of you that are keen on astrology, is you're going to notice the Rahu, North Node, Rahu, Mars, Pluto conjunction in Leo, okay? Rahu, Mars, Pluto, triple conjunction in Leo in the 12th house, okay? And Mars in this chart is ruling the 3rd house and the 8th house. So we're going to talk a lot about like he was, of course, a federal prosecutor and he prosecuted the mob and he really went after the mob and he said, I think I can totally eliminate organized crime. And when we're thinking about, the mob and organized crime, secrets and things like that, we can definitely, and violent, going after violent agencies that think that they're above the law. I mean, that's definitely a Mars-Pluto thing. And one thing about him, going after the mob and trying to find like all their hidden agendas and everything. The 12th house is where we go and we look for things that are hidden. And so his whole thing of I need to prosecute all these members of the mob and bring them into law and order. Now, keep in mind, his midheaven, which rules his career, is also in a conjunction with Saturn here. So it's like, I demand law and order, and I will be respected. And that Rahu, Mars, Pluto conjunction in Leo, that's a powerful conjunction. And that's a conjunction that says, I want control, I want power, I don't want to be messed with, don't get in my way. And various times throughout Rudy's career, people would pay the price for getting in his way, and people would be, harpooned for getting in his way or going against him. A big thing for him was loyalty. We see all these planets lined up in Leo. So a big thing for him was attention, public validation, and loyalty. And if you went against him, because he was a control freak. And if you went against him, you were enemy number one, and he would attack until the cows came home, basically. And so hi, Michaela. Welcome to the live stream. Thank you. And feel free to say whatever you like, share something about your chart, comment on the chart that we're seeing here. Michaela says, I have a 12th house stellium. Awesome. I think people that have 12th house stelliums, I think they're a little complicated. I have 3 planets in the 12th house myself, and people with 12th house planets can be a little hard to read sometimes, or a little complicated, or there's a lot going on underneath the surface that maybe not everybody knows about. And it depends on what planets it is too. Like, it depends on what planets you have in the 12th house and what sign they're in. And also, are they tight enough together that they're making a conjunction with one another? Like, this Rahu, Mars, Pluto conjunction here is tight. It's a tight conjunction between all of these, and boom, it's like a powder keg. Like, Mars is like, violence, anger, war, let's go, motivation, never giving up, fight. And he always made comments, Rudy Giuliani always made comments about, I'm going to keep fighting. I'm going to keep going. I'm not going to, and what's interesting, during September 11th, his leadership was really relied upon, because he's like, we're not going to let these people, we're going to not let them back us into a corner. We're going to stand tall and proud, and we're going to, fight back, and we're going to keep going, and we're stronger than we even know. Like, he gave a lot of these kind of like motivational speeches as the mayor of New York City, right after September 11th, as he was mayor at the time. And it was very like inspiring and powerful to the people. And so he had a way of kind of whipping people up into a frenzy and kind of getting them really like motivated and getting them really going. But he also had a very vicious side to him too. If you came up against him or you were an enemy of his, and don't forget, the 12th house is a house of hidden enemies. And if you were deemed an enemy of his, he would shank you like big time. He would hold a grudge and wait, and then get back at you for daring to question his authority. And he was an authoritarian type of a leader who believed in, concentrated authority kind of at the top. And we can see that with that Leo energy. And we can also see with the Saturn in Gemini and the conjunction with his midheaven right there. See what I'm circling right there? He was like a law and order. He's like, you will like obey the law. You will obey the order of things. You will, like, he had a very paternal tone to him, which is very Leo, but it's also very Saturn conjunction your midheaven, a very serious and paternal tone to the way that he was a mayor and the way that he kind of policed the city. And we'll talk more about that later too, which just makes it even more crazy that now he's completely bankrupt, and that he's facing criminal federal charges So it's quite an interesting story with him, like how he had these great high heights and how he self-sabotaged to get to these low lows. And basically, we also have to remember the 12th house is the house of self-undoing. And we also have to keep in mind that Pluto, especially Mars Pluto with the North Node, may have a tendency to go raw and go hard and never say die, even to the point of like self-undoing, even to the point of shooting your own self in the foot. And one thing I think we need to keep in mind with the 12th house too is that everybody has a 12th house. So every single person has a 12th house. So we all have things that we do that may not be the best for us. We all have areas where we struggle or where we suffer. We all have areas that are sometimes a blind spot, because the 12th house does represent a blind spot, as the ascendant, the first house, does not see the 12th. And so we've got that energy going on there. And Michaela says that she has Mercury, Sun, and North Node. And yeah, well, usually the Mercury and Sun are fairly close together. They don't usually go too far from each other. So you've got a Mercury, Sun, North Node, and I'm not quite sure if that's a conjunction. I've heard a lot of people in the 12th house have tendencies at self-sabotage or to be impulsive. Yeah, I think so. And I also, and again, I'm coming as a 12th house person myself too. There's really good things about the 12th house, and I don't want to skirt on that either. But I also think, Rudy Giuliani has a Mars Pluto conjunction in his 12th house with the North Node or Rahu. And he could be very paranoid. He could be extremely paranoid that people were out to get him. He was always on the lookout for the person trying to get at him or trying to attack or something. He was very paranoid about that. And he had, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer type of a thing. Like there definitely was some of that going on with him and what was hidden beneath the surface. And so let's talk about some of the comments that people have made when it comes to him. And you guys can tell me if you see it in his chart too. Okay, so some of the comments that people have made about him as a federal prosecutor, like I mentioned in his past before, like in the 80s and the early 90s, he was a federal prosecutor, and he was one of the youngest federal prosecutors in history. So, I mean, he rose to the top very, very quickly. And I mean, somebody mentioned that when he cross-examined people, he would get them by inflicting like the damage of 1,000 little paper cuts. Now, tell me that isn't Virgo rising, okay? And he had a tremendous mind for detail as a federal prosecutor. And he would oftentimes make speeches when he was the mayor of New York City without any notes or anything, because he had a very detailed memory. And what's sad now is later in his life is he has like a lot of faux pas, and he like doesn't remember things, and he says he forgets things, but he also drinks a lot these days too. And we can see the ascendant in the conjunction with Neptune, and his addiction or his drinking really has dulled his intelligence in a lot of ways. I mean, he is just getting older too, but I also think the drinking and the lying to himself doesn't help. But when he was a federal prosecutor going after the mob, he was extremely feared by people, like by criminals in New York City, because he was spitting fire. He was going after people. And you can see that, Mars Pluto going in for the kill in Leo, right? Like you will not like question my authority. You will not question my judgment. You will fall in line with what I say. I'm the king. I'm the boss. You will do it. And so that was really the energy there. And some of the words used to describe him were arrogant. Okay. And some of these are the more negative sides of Leo. And we'll hear some of the more positive sides later. But people described him as arrogant, egotistical. Okay, we've got Mars, Rahu, Pluto, arrogant, egotistical. Don't forget, he's also got a moon, Jupiter in Leo conjunction in the 12th house too. So he could also be very generous and playful at times, people would say, but they also said he was arrogant, egotistical, eager for the spotlight, They said he was a showboat. He said that at times he would lie about things to get his way. We see the Neptune on the ascendant there, the lying aspect of things. We see people said he was very self-promoting. Okay, look at all these planets in Leo, very self-promoting. He also made a comment in 2020 when he was trying to help out Trump. He made a comment called "Truth isn't truth." And so I think that's very, Neptune rising on the ascendant, like all mixed up chaos, truth isn't truth. He was also very adulterous, like he was an adulterer and he cheated on all of his wives. Sometimes flagrantly in front of the press and in front of everyone, he would be cheating on his wife. He had an extremely high sexual appetite. We can see that with the Mars Rahu in Leo. I'm the best. I want you. I'm taking you. You're mine. That type of thing. But he also cheated on every single wife that he had. And like in front of her face in very cruel ways at times too. Okay. People called him America's mayor or a heroic mayor. So that's very Leo. Like I need to be the hero or I am the hero. The heroic mayor. People also mentioned that he acted like a bootlicker at times when he was trying to suck up to authority when he was an authority, which later in life, he kind of was doing that with Trump. And we can see that whole ascendant Neptune, the ascendant in Virgo conjunction Neptune and the whole, bootlicking type of things. People called him a no-nonsense mayor at the time. And I also think his career, his midheaven, is in a conjunction with Saturn, which is very no-nonsense, follow the order and the rule of the law, and was a no-nonsense mayor. And now these days, as he's gotten to be much older and his career's completely gone downhill and he's made a fool of himself, people are calling him a deeply disturbed, confused old man with dementia. That's the ascendant with Virgo and Neptune. I don't know if he really has dementia as much as he just believes his own lies, So I don't know about that. But I also think people have also called him like a deranged clown, especially as he was defending Trump and all of that. We can see the Sun square Chiron with Sun Uranus in Gemini, square Chiron, a deranged clown or somebody who's acting like really crazy and saying really crazy things. All right, Sun Uranus conjunction in Gemini. And he was known for like drinking and getting like shit-faced and then going on TV and trying to like ramble and spit facts, which is very much like a Neptune on the ascendant in Virgo, as Virgo is ruled by Mercury and does have to do with the dissemination of information and facts. So he would go on like news and TV shows and try to be like hammering away at things going on. And then, but he would go on these shows later on when he was working for Trump, like drunk or shit-faced, and he would just come off completely like out of pocket to people. And people are like, what is going on with Rudy Giuliani? Like, what happened to him? He used to be this like well-respected, like full of stature type of a guy. And now he's just like stumbling all over the place, like mumbling shit. And it doesn't even make sense. Okay. And Michaela said, I would be interested in a reading from you, like learning lots of information. I like learning lots of information. Cool, Michaela. If you're interested in a reading with me, you can go to any of my videos, go to the description box. There's a link to my astrology site called Lilith Rising. You can click on the link and it will take you to my website where you can book your reading. And so thank you so much. I appreciate that, Michaela. Lady Babaji, wow, look at that chart, Kite. I just felt the gravity of the apex there. Yeah, it is a chart, isn't it? It is a chart, that is for sure. And what really intrigues me about the chart too is that the ascendant is at 29 degrees Virgo. And, I don't know, like, here's an interesting thing. I read this entire book, you guys. This book is called The Rise and Tragic Fall of America's Mayor, Giuliani. And it's a 400-page book. I just finished reading it because I really wanted to understand. And the guy who wrote it used to interview Giuliani like all the time when he was a mayor back in the day, and has followed his career for the entire time, and had close access to him for a lot of time. But anyway, it's a very interesting book, 400 pages long, about his life. But I kept looking for signs like, okay, it says because 29 degrees Virgo ascendant is the very last degree of Virgo. So I kept thinking, okay, like, is that birth time correct? Is he actually a Libra rising? But whether he's a Virgo rising or a Libra rising, I still think the Virgo rising makes a lot of sense. And I did look at, and obviously I got his birth time from Astrology, which is the Rodin rating scale, where they give charts like A or double A. They give them ratings for the accuracy of their birth time. And this chart was rated A, which is a pretty good rating. And so I took the birth time from there. But yeah, it's interesting. His ascendant is at 29 Virgo. But Neptune is at 1 degree Libra. So Neptune is still in a conjunction with that ascendant for sure, either way. Oh, I just realized that I'm not. Oh, it's DG. Hi, DG. Welcome. Yes. Her Serene Highness. Hello, my dear. Hello. Good to see everybody. Happy New Year, everybody. And yeah, DG, I didn't know that was you. That's your other account. So but yeah, Rudy Giuliani back in the day was a hard charging federal prosecutor going after the mob. And that Mars, Pluto, Rahu in Leo, yeah, that's a hard charging type of a combination right there. Like a never say die type of a combination. Some people said that he was an inspiring leader with a strong moral compass. Like people have just had so many different views of him over time. And I think a lot of it does come down to the sun in Gemini with Uranus, because it's like we're seeing two different people here with two different views, right? Like he's an inspiring leader with a strong moral compass. On one hand, he's led America through September 11th as this dignified mayor. On the other hand, he's a total nut job, and he's shaving in public at the airport and passing gas at court at court appointments in Michigan to overturn the election. So he's a bit of a character here. We've got a bit of a character on our hands. And, the sun, Uranus, and Gemini. I also showed you guys at the beginning, I showed you a picture of him and Donald Trump from 2001, where he's dressed in full drag in this skit. There he is, dressed up as a woman. With Donald Trump. And also Donald Trump is a Gemini too. So these two are like two peas in the pod. They're both baby boomers. They both have Pluto and Leo. They're both obsessed with power. They're both from New York City. But a lot of people forget that Rudy Giuliani was actually the back in the day was actually the one that had all the power, because he was the mayor of New York City and Trump just was a resident who lived there. But the tables turned when Donald Trump won the presidency, and then Rudy became kind of his, guy in the pocket or whatever. But anyway, so let's talk a little bit more about the chart. I also want to talk about Chiron in Virgo in the first house. Okay, so I mentioned already he is a ascendant at 29 degrees Virgo. He's got Chiron in the first house, and that Chiron is squaring his sun in Gemini. And a lot of times when we see challenging aspects with sun Chiron, or you see Chiron in the first house, it can be somebody that, was picked on or bullied, or somebody who, somebody who's had to overcome issues like with self-worth, somebody who's really at times felt low self-esteem, or it could be somebody who's a healer, or somebody who has a chip on their shoulder is another thing too. So there's many different expressions of that. I'm just giving a couple of them right now. But the Chiron in the first house squaring his sun is particularly interesting, especially when we start talking about Rudy Giuliani's father, as the sun represents father, and the impact that his father had on him, but also the fact that his father had a huge chip on his shoulder, which I think was also kind of conveyed over to Rudy Giuliani in a way too, like father, like son, in a little bit of a way there. But right when I looked at his Chiron in Virgo in the first house, and then I looked at his ascendant in Virgo, and then I looked at his Saturn in Gemini conjunction his midheaven of career, square his ascendant in Virgo, I thought this is a guy who's a workaholic. Like, and that was my first like inclination was he's a workaholic and he is always, always working, and he's always on. And I actually Googled, was Rudy Giuliani a workaholic? And I found a quote, and there was a quote that came up that said, all work, no play. He says that he's all work and no play, and his campaign, his mayor, or any campaign that he was doing, whether he was mayor or federal prosecutor, whatever, he's all work and no play, campaign available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. I'm available 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So no matter what, the guy was always working. And keep in mind, he went to college during the 60s. He was born in 1944 and he went to NYU for law school, but he wasn't part of like the beatnik culture of the 1960s. He was actually quite conservative, and he went to Catholic high school, college, everything, all the way till he went to law school. He'd been in Catholic school his whole life, and he actually considered becoming a priest as well for the Catholic Church. So he had this, and you can see Saturn conjunction the midheaven. He had this very strict kind of view about like how you should look and be clean shaven, and that, always wearing a suit, always wearing a tie, like very strict and severe look. And a lot of photos, he rarely smiled. You can see his ascendant is square that Saturn, and with Chiron rising in Virgo, hardworking, working hard, not playing a whole lot. He did like to drink, but he didn't really start drinking as crazily, I think, until he lost his bid for the presidency in 2008. Then he became really depressed and started drinking a lot. But actually, I'll show you guys a picture of him. He looks quite severe. He looks very Saturnian, very Virgo, very Saturnian, very serious. He was actually very, very serious, and not in this picture later when he got a bunch of power and was having more fun. But when he was an up and coming federal prosecutor, this is what he looked like, comb over, straight comb over, suit and tie all the time. Here he is, Saturnian figure, right? A very Saturnian look, like a very Virgo, like analyzing everything. When he was the mayor, he had like a bunch of accountants and CPAs work for him, and Harvard MBAs who were like, helping him balance the budget of New York City. And, it was a huge budget. It's one of the biggest budgets in like the nation for a mayor. And he memorized all the facts and figures and gave the budgetary speech instead of his head of finance. And his head of finance, who had an MBA from Harvard and was an accountant, said that he memorized every single number on that page to the decimal point. And when he went and gave the speech about New York City finances, he didn't read from note cards or anything. And so we're talking about a guy, an extreme Virgo with an extreme mind. He did graduate magna cum laude from law school. He was one of the youngest federal prosecutors in the history of the United States. Like, he was a very Saturnian, severe figure from the time that even he was young, and he didn't get involved in the fun and free love culture of the 1960s at all. He was very, very serious, very buttoned down. And when he became mayor, he was heavily aligned with the police, heavily aligned, and supported them like with everything he had. And basically his whole thing as mayor of New York City was to clean up the city, like because the city had gotten overrun. It was way over budget. No one wanted to live there anymore. There was crime everywhere. And his whole thing was, I'm cleaning up this city and I'm getting serious about crime and I'm arresting everyone. And I'm also going after the mob. And so like he had this whole thing going on, very, very serious demeanor, not somebody you'd want to really tango with in that perspective. But talking about cleaning up, right? Virgo, like I'm cleaning up this city. And his whole thing, he went by the broken windows theory that the more like broken windows there are and the more disorder and disarray there is, the more there are opportunities for crime. And so he really started cracking down on everything and closing like seedy establishments in New York City and kind of like cleaning everything up. So he was kind of like this good Catholic boy who wanted to be a priest originally that decided to go into politics and found out, like his extreme ambition, all right, Rahu, Mars, Pluto, and Leo, his extreme ambition was going to be rewarded greatly. But there is that Virgo part of him that was like, workaholic, clean up the city, doing everything. Everything has to be order. Everything has to be neat. Everything has to be tidy. And people would say, like, when he talked to minorities, for instance, a lot of times he would use a very condescending tone and he would talk to them like a paternal father. You can see that Saturn conjunction his midheaven of being that very paternal Saturnian figure about getting your act together and stop committing these crimes. And there was a lot of, problems with his, like he did clean up New York City and he did put the budget in line and he did make it a safer place to live. He did all of that stuff and he did clean up the crime, but a lot of what went under the surface was the way that like minorities were treated and the way that he treated people of color, which was pretty horrible and accusatory as well. And he always was siding with the police all the time, always 100% supporting the police. So that was his vibe as a mayor, like a very authoritarian figure. And this whole, I'm cleaning things up. And he would show up at everything that went wrong as the mayor. If something was going on in that city, he'd pop into his Chevy Suburban and he'd go to it right away and try to fix it and figure out what's wrong. And that's a very kind of Virgo thing. He was also a huge control freak and wanted to control all the if I can talk publicity. He wanted to control all of that, which is very Mars, Pluto, and Leo. He wanted to control all the publicity and everything coming out. And Dublin Fitzpatrick. Hi there, my dear. Hi. Oh, my Rudy, really? LOL. Yeah, he went to NYU Law School in New York City. And imagine the deals those two did under the table. Sheesh. Yeah, definitely. And that's a law school. Photographic memory, or at least a sophisticated memory, synaptic connections. Yes, he did have a very photographic memory. And he would just remember insane facts and figures. To go from somebody who's like so intelligent and has like this raw genius within them to go to somebody who's kind of getting caught with their pants down and like bumbling around is pretty rough. And so we're going to see. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the Chiron in Virgo. And Chiron in Virgo in the first house, when Virgo is rising on the ascendant, can be a workaholic. And Chiron and Virgo can talk about depleted routines, feeling overworked. Lifestyle is not healthy or sustainable. My work damages me, or I go too far with my work. And you can see like all the stress that he had with that Neptune there with his ascendant. He ended up drinking a lot. And so his lifestyle is not healthy. It's not sustainable. As he got older, he was drinking more, stress, gaining weight, all of that. And, Chiron and Virgo in the first house, keep pushing, keep working, hoping to get a break. Okay. And at times he could come off as raw, edgy, easily rattled, agitated, or exhausted. Those could be things of Chiron and Virgo in the first house. Okay. And, stress attacks the body and brain, and it gets a little crazy, right? And we see that ascendant square Saturn with his midheaven of career right there, and how, his health could suffer at times as a result. And he did become overweight, drinking too much, trying to cope with too much stress. Chiron and Virgo in the first house could say, I hurt myself by, too much stress, and I have something to prove, and I hurt myself in my work, and I won't stop until I get there. Also, can you imagine for a Virgo, like the public embarrassment of quote unquote being out of it? I think he was drinking in order to cope with his life, and it just got out of control. But I also think because he was drinking, it wasn't like he had much shame. And so he would just publicly embarrass himself time and time and time again, which is a harsh aspect of Chiron rising. Particularly the Sun square Chiron too, like doing embarrassing things in public or doing embarrassing things publicly because you can't keep your mouth shut. Sun in Gemini conjunction Uranus in Gemini. I can't keep my mouth shut, and I can't control my erratic behavior, and I come off looking kind of like a clown, or I come off looking like really bad, or I come off embarrassing myself because of my mouth and what I'm saying and doing. So that's a tough one. And politics will do that. Geopolitics and finance raises my blood pressure too. Yeah, this is a guy who dealt with pressure, constant pressure. Whether he was prosecuting the mob, he came on television and said, I'm going to prosecute the mob and I'm taking all of them down. And at one point, the mob had an $800,000 bounty on his head, back in the 80s. And so, this is a guy, and a lot of people said that he had no fear gene, he had nothing that told him to stop before doing something. And I think that's very much the Mars, Pluto, Rahu, North Node conjunction is no fear gene, just freaking go for it, consequences be damned. And so, yeah, with the Chiron and Virgo in the first house, he became a public embarrassment for being out of it. He resorted to a lot of self-neglect over the years because of his health and what he was doing and working too much. And also, his health did stop him from achieving some of his goals. When we look at the 10th house as where we want to see our goals, it's the very top of the chart. The 10th house is the top. It's our reputation. It's our goals, right? You can see the damage he's done to his reputation because he's very unhealthy. But also because of his health, Chiron and Virgo in the first house, because of his health, some of his goals haven't been able to be realized. He was trying to run for Senate in 2000 against Hillary Clinton, but he got prostate cancer at the time. And so he had to bow out of the race. And so he's also had health issues come up and things that have come up connected to his 10th house that have stopped him from achieving some of the goals that he's wanted to achieve. And yeah, Chiron and Virgo, I have to be the fix-it person. I have to fix everything. I have to fix all the problems, the stress of it all. And he received much ridicule and criticism from others due to his work. And he has much later, at first he was a hero, right? All this energy in Leo, Moon, Jupiter conjunction in Leo. Everyone loves me. I'm a hero, etc. Everyone admires me. I'm their best friend, that type of thing. But then, later in life, as he got older and as he succumbed more to the drinking, Neptune conjunction the ascendant, people did start to ridicule him. And you did see that public humiliation side of the whole Chiron thing come out. Chiron, Sun square Chiron. And speaking of public humiliation, I kind of mentioned it in a bit in the beginning, but back in 2020, when he was trying to overturn the election results, for Trump, he was in this courtroom in Michigan. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, And he was mic'd up at the time, and he was trying to speak to this committee in Michigan to allow them to do a recount or something. I forget what the issue was in Michigan, but he was basically, Rudy was saying, he's pissed off about the election and there's fraud and stuff. And as he's testifying in front of this committee, he actually passes gas as he is as he's testifying twice, not once but twice. And then the gal sitting next to him is like, because he's all mic'd up and he's like passing gas over the microphone. And so, like there's things like this going on with him at the end. And most people, when they're 78, 79 years old, are not still like hard charging, trying to do something. A lot of times people are kind of slowing down. And so, and you could see the Virgo, the tummy issues and the flatulence in the courtroom, like that is pretty, it's pretty tough. But anyway, yes, everybody, Dublin Fitzpatrick says, I remember everyone loved Rudy after 9/11. Yeah, everybody did. Like everybody's like, and I'll give you guys some of the quotes. Like people were like, he's a god, he's amazing, he saved us. Like no one was looking at President Bush, George W. Bush at the time, as like anybody's savior. They were looking at Rudy Giuliani, the mayor of New York City, like lead us out of this, horrible incident and give us hope and give us strength. And we see the lineup of the planets in Leo. So it's like, yeah, people were really tagged on to that message. Also, Virgo ascendant, Chiron rising. Okay, ascendant square Saturn in the 10th house. Hard time relaxing, hard time shutting off from work, hard time relaxing. Okay. So with that, let's go into a little bit more. I want to talk about the 12th house in a bit greater detail. So when I first started looking at this chart, I was like, oh, like, all these planets in the 12th house, eek. But I was like, how does this, at first I was kind of like, because the 12th house can be confusing, and you're like, how does this apply to him? Like he was such like a hard charging public guy. But let me read you guys some. Remember, he is a guy that went after the mob that later in life is kind of like being looked at as a traitor against the United States government for trying to overturn an election with faulty allegations. So like, this is a lot of 12th house stuff because the 12th house does have to do with, hidden matters. It does have to do with traitors, like old school, ancient astrologers associate the 12th house with traitors or people who go against their country. And so, this is a pretty interesting, and I mean, again, everyone has a 12th house. Not everyone that has a planet in the 12th house is a traitor against their country, right? But we see a guy with a tremendous amount of power, okay? Mars, Pluto, Rahu in Leo, tremendous amount of power. And what he does with it is interesting. So the 12th house in astrology represents hidden things that are hidden and restrained in secret. Sometimes 12th house matters are incapable of action or being fully understood. And that's what I also think, like, the guy who wrote this biography about Rudy Giuliani was talking about how hard he was to understand and how he's fascinated him for his entire career as a journalist, the guy who wrote this book. I also think it's the Neptune rising on the ascendant that makes him hard to figure out what's going on here. And multiple people talked about how he would gaslight people with facts and figures all the time. And I think that's interesting for a Virgo rising with Neptune, gaslighting people with facts and figures over and over again. That's an interesting tactic. But ancient astrologers would say, and I want to show you guys a reference book here really quick. This is for those of you that love astrology, this is a really amazing book. This is called Temples in the Sky by Deborah Holding. And she talks about a lot of the ancient associations with the houses. So more of the traditional kind of associations with the houses. And some of the fascinating, she's quoting astrologers from the 15th century, the 14th, the 13th century. Like she's quoting old school astrologers that, made a lot of contributions to the art. But what she said about the 12th house was the 12th house represents sad events. Okay. He's declaring bankruptcy at 79 years old, sad events in the 12th house, sorrow, anguish of the mind. Okay, the 12th house also has to do with persecution or being persecuted. Now, keep in mind, he was one of the youngest prosecutors in the entire history, federal prosecutors in the United States. The 12th house has to do with persecution. But are you persecuting others, or are others persecuting you? Or is it a mix of both? But the 12th house does have to do with persecution, prosecuting, or being persecuted. And so that is an interesting thing. Now, the 12th house also has to do with hard labor. And, he was at it 24/7, even at 75 years old. He's still hard at it, going crazy, working every day. And the 12th house is also the house of self-undoing. So I'm going so crazy on everything. Rahu, Mars, Pluto, and Leo, I'm going so crazy that I like overdo it. And many people, like many judges later on described like him in the courtroom, like even when he was a prosecutor back in the day, in the courtroom, he was always on overkill all the time. Overkill, overkill, overkill. And the 12th house has to do with like not having a carefree lifestyle. I don't think that guy had much of a carefree lifestyle until much after 9/11, when he started having a lot of money and spending more and stuff like that. But he wanted to be a priest for a while too. And the 12th house does represent monks and nuns in places of isolation. So at one point, and interestingly, he did have a best friend who was a priest who was convicted of touching children, which is interesting. I mean, it's not interesting that that happened, but he did have a best friend from Catholic school that became a priest, that ended up, getting in trouble for hurting children. But anyway, so the 12th house can also have to do with scandals, particularly with this lineup, scandals and power. And the 12th house also has to do with unknown enemies or hidden enemies. And he was very paranoid about his enemies. The 12th house also has to do with conspiracy theories and things that are and there's an interesting thing because personally, at one point in my life, I was dating somebody who was really big into conspiracy theories, and they had a ton of planets in their 12th house. Now, I have planets in my 12th, and I am not a conspiracy theorist. Okay, I'm not by any means, but some of the really hardcore conspiracy theorists, the reason they are that way is because they want to feel unique. And they want to feel like they're in the know and they know everything and no one else knows anything. And they also want to feel like a certain sense of egotistical pride about the fact that I know stuff and other people don't. And so there's a sense of superiority that comes along with that, and ego validation and instant gratification from the mystery and quote unquote knowing the mystery. And so, it's interesting. He has all these planets in the 12th house, and he did end up becoming this. It's like he was so paranoid and he held so much power for a long time that when it left him and he was trying to get back to having that much power, because he couldn't grab it and seize it as easily as he had before, he became a conspiracy theorist. So that is very interesting too. And he was an Italian Catholic. That's right. And he went after, Dublin Fitzpatrick is saying, was he an Italian Catholic? Yes, he was. And he went after the mob as a federal prosecutor because he was like, there is so many stigmas against Italian, like American Catholics. And I want to clean this up, and I want to get rid of organized crime. And so it's interesting because he is going after organized crime, Mars, Pluto, Rahu, like going after it, but he also becomes a part of it later on, as his kind of morals turn and he becomes this different person, right? Keep in mind, he's got this Sun Uranus conjunction in Gemini. And I also have something to say to you about the women that he was with too, that I also think had a big impact on his like turning and his entitlement, and also like his egotistical needs, like with women, is also something I'll talk about too. Um, I'm glad you broke up with Alex Jones. Oh my God. Yes, I know. I did date someone like that, and I didn't know like how bad they were until like later on in the relationship. And it was like it was too late then, but I was like, what, like what avenue of hell did I just walk into? And what's interesting with Rudy Giuliani is I don't think he was always a conspiracy theorist. Like he was very Saturnian, as we can see from his chart, conjunction his midheaven. And he had this like moral, like this is the way that it is, like strict moral guidelines. But as he, like I said, as he was trying to, he kept drinking, and I think that changed his mind and changed things. But also he tasted power after September 11th and had tons of hero worship, bestowed upon him, and it caused him to, I feel like it's in him, right? It caused him to turn. And anyway, so the 12th house also has to do with people who maliciously undermine their neighbors from ancient astrology, people who maliciously undermined their neighbors. Also, people who secretly inform against their neighbors. At one point, he was actually duped by a Russian agent, and he was sharing information with him, and it all came out in the news. It was later in 2020 that he was like sharing information with a Russian agent who was trying to affect the election. Like it was a whole thing. And the 12th house also has to do with traitors, and like traitors, like people who are traitors to their nations, traitors and malicious hauntings, things that haunt you and continue to haunt you and haunt you. And, his insatiable need for power is something that haunted him his whole life. It's interesting because his last name is Giuliani, but people started calling him Giuliani, like a ghoul, like Giuliani, which I was like, that's actually a little bit crazy, like the Giuliani. And especially after I was like, Giuliani, these people are out of pocket. And the Giuliani came in after the 2020 election when he was giving the press conference about overturning the election, and he started like leaking out hair dye, and people like started calling him Giuliani at that point. But, the 12th house is really where ghouls are indeed. And can you guys imagine anything more Neptunian than like vast amounts of hair dye just kind of like sweating off of you, like liquefying off of you? Like people didn't know what it was at first. They're like, what is this like substance that's like liquefying off of his face and like melting? And that's very Neptunian to have like a liquefying thing falling off of your face, especially since the ascendant represents the face and represents, how you look. So that is very crazy too. And sometimes we got to pull ourselves out of that rabbit hole. That's right. Dublin Fitzpatrick. I like it. Thumbs up, right? We got to pull ourselves out of that rabbit hole. And not that crazy. Look at his teeth and hair dye. Yeah, his teeth. I mean, it's sad in a way, but it's also like, what is going on here? It's like, what is going on? And so the 12th house in like mundane astrology could represent deceivers of a nation, traitors. And the 12th house also does represent determination to look in the deepest corners where no one else digs. Okay, because, as my first astrology teacher told me, if you need to bury a body, bury it in the 12th house. No one will find it there. It'll be gone forever. Like that's where you bury the bodies. And, he was being funny at the time, but there is a thing, especially in traditional astrology, about the 12th house being associated with the determination to look in the deepest corners and dig, dig, dig. And, he was doing that with the conspiracy theories and all of that, and Hunter Biden and everything he was trying to dig, dig, dig into. And it's like, he can't stop digging, right? Like, he's just, at that point, he was also trying to please the president because he was giving Donald Trump what he wanted to hear. But again, determination to look in the deepest corners and try to dig, dig, dig and find things when he was going after the mob and prosecuting the mob, like that is a very, big part of it, of that 12th house for him, I think. And there is another quote that I would like to give you guys from a traditional ancient astrologer from many, many, many moons ago, many centuries ago, named Ibn Ezra. And Ibn Ezra said the 12th house is associated with those which serve as a mount for men, those which serve as a mount for men. And if we talk about like mounting something, right? Like, that's why the 12th house is associated with great cattle and horses and oxen, and big beasts of burden are associated with the 12th house. And but basically, this astrologer Ibn Ezra from many, many centuries ago said the 12th house is associated with those which serve as a mount for men. Now, I would argue that Donald Trump mounted Rudy Giuliani and rode him into the ground. Okay. So he did serve as a mount for another man. And I think that that's interesting too. And I showed you guys, I mean, astrology is just funny in a lot of ways. Like, it's funny, interesting. Look at Giuliani when he was in a skit with Donald Trump. And then this is from the year 2000. And they're playing a funny haha skit. And Trump is hitting on Rudy Giuliani, which he's dressed up as a woman. But anyway, Rudy Giuliani did become the mount for Donald Trump, the great beast of burden that he mounted and then took over for his purposes. And then he should help him out. Yeah, Dublin Fitzpatrick is saying if Trump is his good friend, he should help him, right? But the interesting thing about that is look at Rudy Giuliani's friends. So his 11th house of friends is ruled by the moon, and it's with Jupiter in the 12th house. And so, the 12th house is the house of hidden enemies. And so his friends are in the house of hidden enemies. But also, somebody mentioned that when you were like really loyal to Giuliani and you were really good friends with him, like, and you took care of him, he would take care of you. And he was very generous with his friends, probably to the point of hurting himself again, as his friends are in his 12th house with a conjunction to Jupiter. So, that's another thing. But he did try to go to Donald Trump for help. And Donald Trump, I think he did like one fundraiser for him, but hasn't done anything after that. Like, basically left him like wafting in the wind. And the 12th house is also, the 12th house in a negative way could be like getting used or being the one who's using other people. And Rudy Giuliani did use other people, but he also got used himself a lot too. So especially when people appealed to his ego, all these planets in Leo, especially when people appealed to his ego, then he would like let them use him. And so a lot of people used Giuliani's name after September 11th in order to further their businesses or further what they were working on. And in mundane astrology, the 12th house has to do with criminals, spies, secret enemies of a nation, or at home or abroad. Hidden groups, again, with the conspiracy theories, hidden groups, banished or alienated individuals, okay? Banished or alienated individuals are in the 12th house. And so we can see like he becomes a banished and alienated individual because of his unending drive and quench. He can't quench his thirst for power. And he can't quench that. And so it's just this unending drive. And Yeah, so let's go ahead. Like Icarus, he flew too close to the sun, type of a thing. Now, I just want to quickly touch on. We're actually going to get into some interesting stuff tonight because I am going to go over the transits. I'm going to go over transits. I'm going to go over his zodiacal releasing. I'm going to talk about his perfections. I'm going to show you the chart from when he declared bankruptcy, which was only a couple weeks ago during Mercury retrograde. So I've got quite a few things. But yeah, so ascendant Neptune, I already talked to you guys about his ascendant being conjunction with Neptune. He's an alcoholic. He's had issues. He falls down a lot too. Like his ex-wife talks about how he would constantly like fall down all the time. And yeah, so anyway, and let's see, I don't want to get too, I want to be efficient here, you guys, and be careful. And yeah, it's just interesting with him because, we go back to that Sun Uranus conjunction in Gemini. Like some people saying, oh, he's a great man and he's a visionary. Other people are saying he's a mean-spirited man or he's an opportunist. At one point, he's a transformational leader. At another point, he's an intolerant leader. So if you're friends with him, he's nice to you and he's playful and he's fun and he gives you what he wants. Okay. The moon ruling his 11th house of friends, right? But if you go against him, you're going to get the axe, Rahu, Mars, Pluto. Okay. And I just want to talk a little bit about the Mars Rahu conjunction because that deserves a little bit of our time. So we have Mars Rahu conjunction in Leo here. And Mars Rahu, or the North Node, Mars Rahu in especially in Leo, particularly in the sign Leo, could represent success in armies, martial careers, okay, freedom fighters, successful campaigns, ambitions achieved, given to leadership, assertive people who win battles, terrific energy, terrific stamina. Okay. The negative side of this Mars Rahu conjunction in Leo could be selfish and cruel, insensitive, the fierce warrior, overbearing, ruthless without thinking of consequences, greedy, pursues ambitions to achieve personal goals at any cost, lustful, and hyperactive. As I did mention, he was a chronic adulterer and cheated on every wife that he had. But also Mars Rahu conjunction in Leo could represent like courage and nerves of steel. Okay. And on 9/11, like he did not flinch and he did not back down. And people looked at that as a sign that like he's got, his friend actually quoted, I think I said earlier, his friend made a quote about him and said, he's missing the fear gene. So like no fear, going into things, rushing into things, Mars, Rahu, and Leo. I'll be the leader. I'll take control. He actually wrote a book called Leadership, which was about his leadership during 9/11. And so he really milked 9/11 for all that it was worth and like got a lot of money and speaking gigs from it. And anyway, but he would get really bad depression. Okay. Ascendant square Saturn conjunction his midheaven. When he failed or when he didn't achieve his goals, he would get really bad depression and start drinking, the Neptune there. Okay. Another thing about Mars Rahu, Mars North Node, Rahu acts like Saturn and is a must do now type of an energy with Rahu. Okay. Mars and Rahu are not friends. Mars and Rahu is a tense, difficult testing aspect. It requires power and courage. The power unleashed could be unleashed in very destructive ways. It could show someone who has a very impetuous temper and who could be possibly accident prone. Rahu or the North Node is also a politician and has a politician's mind. So when you put the politician's mind or the politician with Mars, leadership, power, courage, Rahu, Mars, Pluto, and Leo could be a signature of somebody who is like a great general who goes to battle and wins, and consistently wins. Like that could be, and that's who he came off as during 9/11. Like he came off as this very tough and strong, no nonsense. But I think he also too at that time came across as being somewhat compassionate as well. So you saw the Neptune come out there. But Rahu represents a political mind and political maneuvering. And so when you would try to get in his way, like in a run for political office, he would shank you for that. Like he wouldn't forget it and he would try to get you back. Okay. And that was his vibe. And Rahu can also represent drugs or poison and can be poisonous to others. And you need to be careful with Rahu of being very impulsive, particularly with Mars, and just going after things without thinking. Also, there's this quote, and I wrote the quote as the title for this video called, "I don't care about my legacy, I'll be dead." Now, I think that's a very rude quote, particularly to his children, because he does have two children, and the fifth house is the house that represents our children, and the fifth house is ruled by Capricorn. So we would look to this Saturn, okay, as representing his children. His children are in a square to him. He didn't speak to his children for several years because they hated his, third wife. But also his daughter refuses to speak to him because of his political beliefs. Like she voted for Joe Biden and she was like, "Don't listen to my dad," basically. And she's like way different than him politically. And but his whole thing of "fuck my legacy, I don't care, I'll be dead anyway," that's a very selfish attitude to have as a parent in particular. Like when he's out here doing these things, it's like, are you even thinking of your children? Are you even like, do you even care about their financial future? Because he's out there defaming people and he just got a $148 million judgment against him. Now he has to file for bankruptcy, or he did file for bankruptcy. But at one point, this guy was worth like 45 million, and he had multiple properties. So if you're just like, "I don't care about my legacy, I'll be dead," like, fuck it. Like that's, especially if you're a parent, that's a very fatalistic attitude to have. And I think it's a very selfish attitude to have. And I mean, I feel very bad for his children because I think he only cares about himself. And I think he only cares about what he wants and having power and getting what he wants in life. And even if it bankrupts him and he has nothing to pass on to his children, or he destroys his reputation to the point where his own children are like embarrassed as well, like he doesn't care, and I think that that's really messed up. And that's a tough thing. And Dublin Fitzpatrick, all politicians have that issue, corruption. Dublin, I'm from Nebraska. That's how we talk. That's cool. That's cool. No worries. You can talk that way. It's more than a rude comment. It's self-centered and evil. Yeah, I agree. I don't care about my legacy. I don't care what I do to other people. I don't care whatever. Like I'm just self-destructive. And, I think so he has a son that tried to run for office. The children are in his 10th house. So his children very much have an impact on his career. And one of his children tried to also run for office, but lost. And then his daughter has been very vocal about going against him from a belief perspective and speaking out against him. And we can see his ascendant is squaring his children. So, not an easy relationship there, but I also feel like he has showered women with money as well, or the women in his life have been very demanding, like his third wife. Okay, so the 7th house would represent his partner, and it's ruled by Pisces. So we would look to Jupiter. And we can see Jupiter in Leo with the moon there. Okay. So this would kind of represent his partner. And his third wife was very materialistic. She wanted him to run for president. She was all into it. According to his aides and the reporter who wrote this book, she was like a real nightmare of a woman, very demanding. And like, you know, wanted more things and more things and more things, and encouraged him to spend money and more money and more money. And I think it's interesting because the planet that represents his money, which would be the ruler of the second house, is this Venus at 29 degrees Taurus. And we know that any planet at 29 degrees is in trouble. It's a crisis point for a planet. And it just kind of reminds me of Bernie Madoff, who also has Venus at 29 degrees Taurus. But talk about, you know, Rudy Giuliani went from rags to riches, from riches to rags. Like he went back and forth, back and forth. And a lot of, you know, what he was trying to do in life, like strive for money, strive for power. A lot of it, I think, some of it had to do with his mother, who expected him to get straight A's all the time, expected that he would run for president and win, like put a lot of pressure on him to succeed. And and then the women that he was with, I feel, were also, especially his third wife, very demanding, very like rude and demanding, and wanting to be the center of attention as well. And so I think his relationships were a problem as well too. And anyway, he's been married 3 times. Dublin Fitzpatrick, he's been married 3 times, but he's cheated on every single one of them for like years on end, like flagrantly, like to the press, like this is who I, you know, like just in a really, really cruel way too. Cheating. And I could talk about his father a little bit. His father at one point, see, the funny thing about Rudy Giuliani is that the third house in astrology, now Rudy Giuliani was an only child, but he did have like a lot of uncles and cousins. His first wife was his second cousin, actually, interestingly, but scandal, right? But like the third house represents aunts and uncles and cousins and things like that. And Rudy Giuliani did have cousins and uncles and things that were in the mafia. And we can see the third house is ruled by the Mars, which we would look to this Mars-Pluto conjunction here. Again, we would go back to this conjunction to look at how are his like uncles and cousins and things like that. His father was also a guy who worked for his uncle, who would like go and break people's kneecaps if they weren't paying up. And his father, Rudy Giuliani's father, actually served time in prison. And there was also rumors that he was homosexual or engaging in homosexual activities in like cruising areas. And then he got arrested for that. And it's just his father had a lot of things. And then his mother was like very no nonsense. But you can see the father, the book talked about how his father always had a chip on his shoulder. We can see the sun representing the father, square Chiron. Now, his father was like a common criminal, but Rudy Giuliani didn't, and more than a common criminal, he was involved with the mafia and he was breaking kneecaps and stuff like that. But Rudy Giuliani always said that his father would be like, say as I do, or do what I say, not what I do. And would told him like, you have to respect people, you have to respect the police, all this stuff. But Rudy Giuliani like looked up to his father and hero worshiped him. But when he was in prison, somebody like examined his father, and a psychologist examined him and said his father was a deeply troubled, sad man who was highly aggressive and had a deviant personality and was pathological in nature and was very egocentric and failed to consider the feelings of others. That was a psychologist's comment about his father, and that the father had a major chip on his shoulder. And so, but yet Rudy Giuliani like hero worships his father, thinks he's like the greatest thing ever. And So you can see already like the Neptune there. Like here's a guy who's incredibly smart. Like I mentioned, Virgo rising, memorize facts, figures, everything. But when it comes to his father, when it comes to like being a good judge of character, not a good judge of character at all. And so you've got that Neptunian thing going on there. And I think I am going to, as far as his chart, I think I'm going to go ahead and leave it there. And we talked a lot about different things in the chart. We could go into more, but now I want to look at some of the things that have been going on. So let's look to November 7th, 2020. So November 7th, 2020 is the time when Donald Trump had lost the 2020 election and Rudy Giuliani was, let me pull this out of the way here. And Rudy Giuliani was November 7th. This is a picture from November 7th, 2020. They went to have a press conference in front of a Four Seasons hotel, but it actually turned up being a Four Seasons like landscaping company in a random neighborhood in Philadelphia near a crematorium and a porno shop. And so it was like the most like random like press conference. And basically Rudy Giuliani is, Trump's already lost the election, but he's on the pulpit in front of this weird rundown building in this random neighborhood, arguing that the press doesn't have the right to call the election and that judges are going to decide the election. So he starts kind of like, and this whole thing where he gives this speech is like a week away from the meltdown incident where he starts, this happened on November 19th of 2020. So like within a couple of weeks of each other, where he has this meltdown incident where he starts like literally melting, talking about the voter fraud. And then a couple of weeks after that, he has the incident in court where he's sitting there and he's mic'd up and he passes gas in front of everyone like multiple times. Poor guy. But anyway, I mean, right. I mean, just that's embarrassing. But like, I mean, it's like, come on. I don't feel sorry for him for everything he's done. But anyway, so obviously some crazy stuff happening on November 7th, 2020. This is the time that he was having that press conference after Trump lost and was trying to insinuate that, something was wrong at that time. That's kind of like when the conspiracy theory was kind of taking root. And one thing I want to note about this chart is the moon's placement. So we can see the transiting moon in Leo was right on top of that Mars-Pluto-Rahu conjunction right there. The transiting moon at the time of that press conference was right there. And, the moon in Leo really says, I'm going to protect the king. I may not be I might not be the king, but I'm sure as hell going to protect the king. Because without the king, aka Donald Trump, without Donald Trump, I'm not anything. I don't have anything anymore. I have nothing to hold on to. And so the moon in Leo with the Mars, the paranoia, the not wanting to give up on the election. Also, Rudy Giuliani wanting to be the center of attention and be like, he loved the media and he loved being the center of attention, but also the whole energy of Moon and Leo at the moment that conference happened of him, like, I need to protect the king, AKA, Moon and Leo, protect the king. And, the other thing that was going on right now at that time when that election happened and he started contesting those results was a Mars retrograde in Aries in his 8th house. And again, this just kind of like, added fuel to the fire and made things even worse. And, he was coming off as like angry and unhinged and, this type of thing, like digging himself a bigger hole with this runaway Mars with nothing to lose with this Mars retrograde in Aries. Okay. And I also think a reason why he was like so interested in keeping Trump where he was is because of his like mounting debts, and he had no way to really like make money, and he had to pay like divorce settlements to his ex-wife. And you can see there's a Venus Mars opposition on that day that he gave that speech in Rudy's second house of money and eighth house of debt. And so I do think maybe like he was stumping really hard for Trump at that point, because it's like, I could never pay like this. He has to pay all this money to his ex-wife. And at that point, he's not having the money. Okay. And at that time, we can also see Uranus in Taurus is creeping up there on the Mercury in Taurus, which represents the ruler of his ascendant. And that whole thing of him saying, starting to say some really shocking things, and him starting to kind of plant the seed that, shocking things are coming, or this isn't over yet. And also that press conference was very impromptu, and it was supposed to be at an actual Four Seasons hotel, but it ended up being at a weird landscaping company. So the whole thing was just weird, and Uranus is right there on the ruler of his ascendant. The whole thing was weird. And, he started kind of spouting wild ideas at that time. And another thing I really want to talk to you guys about is where the nodes were at that time. So the transiting nodes, so the North Node in Gemini was right on his Saturn, and the South Node, transiting South Node, was in Sagittarius right there. Okay, so these are the transiting nodes. And as he had the hair dye meltdown and the Four Seasons conference, like a couple weeks after that was going to be the Gemini full moon lunar eclipse on November 30th. And that eclipse that happened on November 30th of 2020 was right on his Sun Uranus conjunction. And so while all of this stuff was going on in 2020, late 2020 into 2021, Rudy Giuliani was having eclipses on his sun. And that eclipse that happened on November 30th was exact on his sun in Gemini. Now, eclipses on your sun or moon can be really nasty. So that eclipse was also 2 or 3 days before he had the flatulence in public incident when he passed gas in the courtroom. And so he had the hair dye, he had the weird press conference at the weird location by a porno shop, not the Four Seasons Hotel. His hair dye was leaking on him. He's alleging voter fraud, and he's passing gas in the courtroom multiple times. Okay. And one quote that he made during this time, as these eclipses were hitting his sun in Gemini, was that I'm willing to bet my reputation on this. Like that Donald Trump is the winner. I'm willing to bet my reputation on this. And the 10th house is our reputation. The sun also represents our reputation and who we are in the world. And so it's like, I'm willing to bet my reputation that I'm right and you're wrong, because I'm infallible and I know what's going on and you don't. Like that was his energy and his vibe. But again, those eclipses were happening right on his natal sun in Gemini. And, eclipses on your sun are king killers, because the sun represents the king, and eclipses are the energies that strike down the king, that eclipse the king. And so it's like, boom, no, right? And when those eclipses happened a couple of weeks later on his sun in Gemini, those eclipses were also a flashpoint on his Chiron in Virgo. We're squaring his Chiron in Virgo. And so they were hitting his sun Chiron square at the exact time that he was passing gas in the courtroom, and the hair dye was falling down on his face and all of that, which really speaks to the public humiliation that he went through at that time. But he was falling asleep at meetings. A lot of people said that he was like really so drunk at that time that he didn't really know, and he had no like shame lever, and he was feeling like no shame about any of it at all. And he was probably drinking, and that's the Neptune on the ascendant. Like he was drinking at that time as well. Yeah, he thought he had a legal basis, and Dublin's Fitzpatrick for that case, and he went to go argue it in Philadelphia, and he hadn't stepped foot in a courtroom in over 30 years, mind you, at the time when he went to go defend that. So the fact that he even went there is just crazy in and of itself. Like, you're trying to allege voter fraud, which is like a huge issue, right? And the judge was like, you have no evidence, like basically read him his rights. And he said to the judge, like, you're not being fair to me. But the judge was actually like a Trump appointed lawyer, and he's like, oh, these Democrat judges or whatever. But it's like the judge was appointed by Trump or Ronald or whoever. It was George W. Bush or some other Republican. So it's like, no, like the judge was actually conservative, was just basing it on the law and was saying, you don't have a case here. You don't even have any evidence. And so anyway, like he did bet his reputation on that. And his reputation did go down the tubes. And so that is very interesting about the eclipses. Now, what I really find wild is that, when he became mayor of New York City back in 1993, which was like his whole like ascent into public office, he was having that same eclipse, a lunar eclipse in Gemini on his sun in 1993, at the moment that he won the mayor's office for New York City, which sent him on a public office trajectory. But then 27 years later, he bets his reputation on this voter fraud issue, and everything goes down the tubes, and it's public humiliation time. And so it's just interesting that the same eclipse happened in 1993 when he won the election to be mayor, and his public career was really taking off at that time. And so, yeah, these Gemini Sagittarius eclipses for him have been quite a big deal, because on September 11th, in 2001, well, not on September 11th, but a couple months after September 11th, there was eclipses, a solar eclipse at 22 degrees Sagittarius, which, was right in his fourth house, opposing his 10th house and his midheaven and his Saturn and all of that. And so, these Gemini Sagittarius eclipses have been really keyed in with Rudy Giuliani's like rise and fall to fame and power, and his very like public career and then public downfall. So I found that really interesting with the eclipses, and how there was an eclipse like just less than 2 weeks before the hair dye incident, when the hair dye was falling off, and like a couple days before the flatulence in court stuff happened. Like all of it was, really bad for his reputation. And so let's go ahead, and now I want to take a look at the verdict. Like when he was hit with recently, this was a very recent verdict where he was hit with $148 million in damages for defaming two Georgia election workers and accusing them of voter fraud, and that they were doing something wrong. And these two women, these poor women that got accused, like they ended up having to leave their house. They were getting all kinds of crazy threats. Like people tried to bust into their house and perform a citizen's arrest on these two women. Like Rudy Giuliani had whipped up such a frenzy against these Georgia election workers that they needed the protection of the FBI. Like their whole lives went to shit, because he basically called these two individuals out and accused them in particular. And they were private citizens who were just like volunteering to work election day. And, none of his assertions turned out to be true. And basically, the two women ended up suing him for defamation. And a couple other, there's more cases going on with this too. This is just one case where as of December 15th of 2023, so very recent, as Mercury was retrograde, it's another Mercury retrograde story we've got here. Look at transiting Mercury retrograde at 7 degrees Capricorn. On December 15th at 3:35 p.m. in New York, in the courthouse, a verdict was passed down stating that Giuliani owed these women $148 million. And the judge was very clear, like, you need to pay them quickly. Like, you can't drag your feet. And so, like, I think it was, 6 days after this verdict, Rudy Giuliani declared bankruptcy. And this is big news because, like I said, he used to be worth like he used to be worth 45 million, plus had huge properties all over the place, Hamptons, New York, mansions everywhere. He was commanding, like, one year he made $8 million in speaking engagements just talking about 9/11. Like, the guy was making money. Like, he had enough money to last the rest of his life until he opened his big mouth. Now, I have the exact time of the judgment when the court was like, because it's a legal document and it's public, it says 3:35 p.m. on the document where the jurors signed it and said, you need to pay $148 million. And at the time that the document was signed, the ascendant was at 10 degrees Gemini. So right on top of that Sun Gemini conjunction again, like, you can't shut your mouth. You can't be quiet about things. You can't control yourself. And now you're going to pay up. And it was in the news everywhere. And it was basically his lawyer, Giuliani's lawyer said, this is equivalent of a death sentence, like, you're ruining him type of a thing. And again, even after Giuliani was ordered to pay these women $148 million and said, hey, you're defaming these women, he still went out on the court steps after he was hit with that huge judgment and still kept defaming them. So it's like, he will not shut his mouth. He will not be quiet. And he just keeps, and he's like, do you regret what you did to these women? And he's like, no, I don't care. And it's like, okay. So it's a very interesting situation of what happened in this verdict. And I find it very interesting, first and foremost, that at the time of this verdict, let me grab my little pen here, that the moon and moon and Pluto were in a conjunction together, and the moon was in Aquarius, right on his south node. And Pluto, of course, Pluto has been inching over, and it's going to be hitting 0 degrees of Aquarius, and he's going to be having Pluto. He already really has it. Pluto conjunction his south node opposite his north node, Pluto opposite Mars, Pluto opposite Pluto. Now, because Rudy Giuliani is a baby boomer and he's a part of the Pluto and Leo generation, the Pluto and Leo people are going to be getting Pluto oppositions. And I heard one astrologer explain it. And not every generation is going to have a Pluto opposition because Pluto's time is very variable, and many of us won't even see Pluto opposite Pluto, our natal Pluto opposite transiting Pluto in our lifetime. But I heard all the baby boomers are going to be getting, as Pluto moves into Aquarius, are going to be getting Pluto and Leo opposite transiting Pluto in Aquarius. And I heard one astrologer describe it as get off the stage. It's time for the baby boomers to like retire and get off the stage. And, they don't want to get off the stage, and they're hanging on to their power or their celebrity or whatever authority they have, and they refuse to get off the stage. And so Pluto comes along basically to say, get off the stage. Like, you will evolve, you will change. This is going to die on the vine now. And so, this whole like me, selfish, self-centered attitude that he's had his whole life is really being put under the microscope right now. And Pluto has come to take its revenge on him karmically. I feel like Pluto's coming back to milk him for whatever he's worth at this point, because he hasn't changed. Pluto's going to change him. And it's hitting his nodes of fate. and it's happening to him very late in life, and it's very scary what's happening to him. Anybody else would be shit scared. Like, I have no money. I'm basically like, I've got nothing. Everyone, my kids don't like nobody likes me. I've got nothing. I may go to jail. Like, he may actually end up going to jail eventually, because the criminal charges haven't even hit yet. They're going to hit next year as Pluto moves into Aquarius. And so, jail time, etc. But what I find particularly interesting about the chart of this verdict is the Moon Pluto conjunction on his south and north node. And talk about powerful women. Now, Giuliani has had issues with women his whole life. And, I think going back to his mother and trying to please them or do things for them, but also cheating on them, gaslighting them, hurting them. He picks out these two women of color, mind you, who were volunteering on election day. And he basically exposes their life to all this craziness and causes them extreme amount of distress. But look at these women exacting their revenge, right? Moon Pluto, right? An angry woman that destroys his life coming in on the scene. You can also see, because we see the moon representing women or the feminine with that Pluto saying, you know what? You're getting it. And it's like he's getting brought down by two women who were essentially volunteers, right? Moon and Aquarius, who were essentially like civil servants, like volunteering, who end up becoming this powerful force in his life, who force him into bankruptcy. And, this Moon Pluto is also opposite his Mars and Leo, and his Mars and Leo also rules the 8th house of debt. And if somebody's going to be going bankrupt, then you would definitely look at the 8th house as, being very active, because the 8th house represents your debts. And, at this time, there was a huge laying on of debt by two women who were essentially getting their comeuppance for what he had done to them. So I find that very interesting. And, So the other thing that I want to note here too is that when we speak about the 8th house and the 2nd house, so the 2nd house represents your money and the 8th house represents your debt. So at the time, the North Node was in Aries in his 8th house, and he's having eclipses. These Aries Libra eclipses that are going on right now are actually hitting his 2nd house of money and his 8th house of debt. And so you can see the eclipses again are having a major impact on him. And with the North Node in Aries, it's like adding on or layering on more debt to him, where the South Node represents a drain of something. So it is representing a drain on his personal money in the 2nd house. And so I find that interesting too, that he's having eclipses in his 2nd house and 8th house as these bankruptcy proceedings are happening. And they're going to continue into next year as the bankruptcy court goes to try to sort out this mess and the order of creditors, because it's not just these women that he owes money to. He owes money to a lot of other people, and there's a lot of other lawsuits as well. He also owes a ton of money to his lawyers that he has not paid either. So that is that. And so that is that. Now let's go ahead and let's see what else we can find here in this chart. So the ascendant of this chart as well, for the day that the verdict was read or that the liability was attached to him, is opposite his part of fortune in the 4th house. Now, the part of fortune in astrology can represent our happiness, or it also can represent our happiness in life or our money. It's another representation of money. So the ascendant of this event is opposite his money. And right now, Giuliani is trying to sell a lot of his properties, but a lot of those properties, and again, he's having a Mars transit in his fourth house. He had significant investments in properties, okay, part of fortune in the fourth house of my property. But now these properties are probably going to have to be sold in a fire sale. We've got Mars creeping up there. He's going to lose all of his properties as a result of this judgment for sure. If he wasn't going to lose them already, he's definitely going to lose his properties now. And his question may be like, where am I going to live? You know, because he will lose all of these properties. And so we see that happening as well. And let's see. Also, we can see Neptune opposing his ascendant. Now, Neptune is in Pisces and is opposing his ascendant at 29 Virgo. And this Neptune transit has been going on for him for a long time. And it's just going to get even hotter as it moves into next year and Neptune gets even closer to his ascendant. But this is problems for his health and his well-being, I feel. Like his health could be very challenged right now. I don't know if he's going to make it through this health-wise because this is a lot of stuff, you guys. You can also see Saturn in the seventh house. He went through a divorce. He's been going through a divorce. Yes, he's with someone else already, but he's been going through a divorce. And, he's pretty miserable. This is a miserable time for him. And Saturn is also getting ready to oppose his Chiron. So again, misery, depression. His sun is squaring Saturn, more depression. He might be feeling very lonely right now too, as well, on top of that. And drinking a lot more on top of that as well is what I'm seeing for this verdict chart. Now, so let's go ahead and see, let's look at the bankruptcy aspect of it, okay? And let's see. Devlin Fitzpatrick, I don't know what you're saying there, but I see what you're writing. And I don't know what we disagree on. You're free to state your opinion, though. But so let's go ahead and look at the bankruptcy. Okay. So a couple days after that, there is a bankruptcy that happens. Now, I know the exact time of the bankruptcy because I could see the document online and it is public and it does show his debts and what he owes. And the time on the form was 12:18 p.m. So I can see the time of the bankruptcy filing and what was going on. So, right after that $148 million verdict, then he declares bankruptcy because the judge is saying, you can't run away from this. Like, you need to pay this. And, you haven't given me your financials. So at this point, I'm going to rush this and say, you have to pay it now. So in the wake of that, he declared bankruptcy. Now, like I mentioned, since I have the time of the bankruptcy, I also have the ascendant. Interestingly, the ascendant for the bankruptcy is at 9 degrees Aries in his 8th house. Now, I mentioned the 8th house is a place where debt happens, debt accrues, or issues such as bankruptcy, monies owed, etc., come up. So the ascendant for that bankruptcy filing is landing in his 8th house. So this bankruptcy is going to stick. Like, he filed an appeal. I don't think it's going to work. The bankruptcy is going to stick, is my prediction. Now, he's not going to be able to walk back this judgment. He said he's going to appeal. I don't think he's going to be successful. He's going to continue on with the bankruptcy. Now, with the bankruptcy, we can also see Chiron is there. We talked about, let's go back and, so the ascendant is, so the bankruptcy ascendant is exactly quincunx's Chiron there as well. Okay. So that's interesting too, with the ascendant quincunx Chiron. And Yeah, he's not, here's the thing. I feel like he's not really connecting to it yet. It is a humiliation. We see the Chiron there in the eighth house. So the Chiron is in a conjunction with the ascendant rising in the eighth house, which to me speaks of, the embarrassment of having to file for bankruptcy and having to do that after all this time being this figure. I don't know if that really I don't know if he feels the embarrassment, though. I don't know if he does because of all the drinking. And so we've got that going on. Now, for the bankruptcy, yeah, this is where I come back to his comment of, I don't care about my legacy. I'll be dead. So Mercury is retrograde at this time. This Mercury is at 2 degrees Capricorn and in the fifth house of children. And so, in the fifth house of his children. And also the eighth house has to do with inheritance or one's inheritance. And so these children, they're not going to get anything from him. Now, I think their mother does have some money, but he's ruined this for his children in particular as well, which I also think is interesting here too. The Mercury retrograde in Capricorn in the fifth house made me think of his children and the fact that he doesn't care about his legacy and that they're not going to be able to get anything. In fact, they may be saddled with debt because of their father, unfortunately. And so let's go ahead and take a look at Pluto. So here we have Pluto again. Pluto is still here on the day of the bankruptcy, putting pressure on his natal nodes. We also see this transiting Saturn is starting to put pressure on his natal Chiron. I think that represents a health issue for him. Neptune is putting pressure on his ascendant. We see that there. And, with Neptune putting pressure on his ascendant, I feel like he's become even more forgetful and he's become even more mentally garbled up. And a lot of the stuff he's doing and saying isn't making sense. He's having these eclipses in his eighth and second house, as I said. And I think there's other stuff going on, but I think I want to leave it there. The biggest thing about this bankruptcy chart is that the ascendant is in his eighth house of debt. So I just found that a little ironic or interesting. And it's like, oh, astrology does work. So let's go ahead and I want to move on from the transits. And I know there's more there. It'll be interesting next year as Uranus moves closer to the ruler of his second house of money and his financial situation changes completely. That'll be interesting as well. So as we move out of the transits, I want to take a look at annual perfections. Now, annual perfections are a Time Lord technique that we use to help with prediction. And I was curious about this year for Rudy. So Rudy his birthday is on May 28th. So this year is he's 79 years old. He turns 79 on May 28th, 2023. This is a Mars Aries. This is an Aries perfection year or an eighth house perfection year for him. And the ruler is Mars. Okay. And so what's interesting about that is that he's having an eighth house perfection year this year. So this year, as he is, having to declare bankruptcy and going through all these debts and financial judgments, he is having an eighth house perfection year. So this is where in astrology, things start really doubling up, where we really are like, okay, this is like double, 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 because we said the eclipses are happening in his eighth house. We said the ascendant for the bankruptcy itself is in the eighth house. And now at 79 years old, in 2023, he's having an eighth house perfection year. And the ruler of the year is Mars. Okay. And again, that's Mars because he has a day chart, his sun is above the horizon. Mars is going to be the most malefic planet. And it's also ruling this 8th house of debt and loss. And so multiple things are happening to that 8th house that show me that, yeah, he is getting hit with a lot of debt and he is declaring bankruptcy. And this is a big year for him as far as his 8th house is concerned. And so we see that happening with the annual perfections. And we see, what got him in trouble again with this 8th house is ultimately the Mars-Pluto, right? The Mars-Pluto-Rahu conjunction of I can't stop, I can't quit, I don't know how to moderate myself, I don't know how to stop myself, and I just drive myself deeper and deeper and deeper into the hole. And so I think that is very interesting about this chart. Now, yeah. So the other thing I wanted to show you guys too is the month that it happened. So the month that it happened, he got into this bankruptcy stuff. Like all of it was really hitting between November 28th and December 28th. In this time frame is when the bankruptcy happened, and the month of from November 28th to December 28th, the sign and the Lord were this Libra and this Venus. Okay. So breaking it down even further, when he was 79 and a half, it was Venus and Libra. And interestingly, Venus rules this 2nd house of money. Okay. So he's going through an 8th house perfection year. He's 79 and a half. If you break it down even further, we can look at the 2nd house during that period where he was getting hit with the bankruptcy. And of course, the 2nd house has to do with money. And so again, we're just taken back again and again and again to this 8th house and to the Mars, Pluto, Rahu stuff and what is happening to him. And, because Mars rules the 8th house and his 8th house ruler is in a conjunction with Pluto and Rahu, the combination says, my need for greed, wealth, and power destroys me and my money. I am the reason for my own self-undoing when it comes to my money. Okay, so very interesting on that interpretation. So those are his annual perfections. So we went through some transits, we went through some annual perfections. Now we are going to hit his zodiacal releasing. So let's take a look at his career as it relates to zodiacal releasing. Now, when we do zodiacal releasing is another predictive technique. It is another Time Lord technique. And in this chart, to start zodiacal releasing, we need to look at the sign that the part of fortune is in. So the part of fortune is in Sagittarius. So we're going to look for the mutable periods. Anytime the signs are in mutable signs, anytime we have mutable signs, we're going to be in peak periods. And those are going to be periods of heightened activity as it relates to Rudy Giuliani's career. So now we're going to kind of go through his career trajectory and go through his zodiacal releasing. So mutable sign periods, whenever we hit Virgo, Pisces, Sagittarius, or Gemini, we're going to see a peak period or an uptick for Rudy Giuliani. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be good or easy, because Saturn falls into Gemini, which is the mutable sign, okay, opposite the part of fortune. And Saturn in this chart is a moderate malefic, okay? So as far as zodiacal releasing is concerned. And so, the mutable periods may not be the easiest, but there are challenges that can be overcome. And the time periods where we have Mars, okay, or we have fixed signs where we have Mars, which Mars is in Leo. So Leo periods could be trouble, along with Aquarius periods, because Aquarius is opposing Leo, obviously, but Mars is the most malefic planet in a day chart. And so the Mars in Leo is definitely going to give him trouble. But Jupiter is the most positive planet in a day chart. So Jupiter is the most positive in Leo, Mars is the most negative in Leo, and Saturn is a moderate malefic, and Venus is a moderate benefic in this particular chart. Now, we're going to keep those rules in mind as we go and we look at the zodiacal releasing. And for those of you that haven't seen zodiacal releasing, we are going to go here and start with the beginning of his life. So right now, he's 71 years old. He is in a Scorpio period right now, all the way. He's 79 right now, but he started a Scorpio period when he was 71, which will go all the way to when he's 85, if he lives that long. But let's start at the beginning, okay, with Rudy Giuliani's life and go through some important dates. So when we're looking at zodiacal releasing, we want to pay really attention to the peak periods. All the periods are important, but especially peak periods. In 1987, he did enter into a peak period. And from 1987 to 2007 was arguably his best time in life because he was mayor of New York City at that time. He was immensely popular. September 11th happened in 2001, which was during this peak period of his career. And he was like this highly decorated hero that everyone loved. And so we see the peak period for him happening at 43 years of age, going till 63. Okay. But before we get into like the 9/11 time and the time when he was mayor and all of that, let's look at 1968 because he graduated from NYU from law school on November 5th, 1968. And so during that period, let's see, November. Okay. Yeah. So November 1968, he was in this level 1 Cancer period. And he would have been in a level 3 Cancer period. And November 5th would have been right before this peak period on level 4 started for November 7th, when he graduated and became a lawyer. But the biggest thing was in 1974, October 1st, 1974, when he was in this peak Sagittarius period in level 2, when he at 26 years old became a federal prosecutor, an assistant U.S. attorney on the rise, and he took down a U.S. congressman for fraud. Okay. So that happened in 1974. And that was during a peak period when that happened on October 1st. On December 8th of 1980, okay, on December 8th of 1980, he decided to switch to a Republican. And I want to actually look at, so now we're on to this Gemini peak period right here. The little plus sign indicates a peak period for this Gemini peak period. And on June 3rd of 1983, he was named the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. And technically, it was a step down for him at the time. But this was where he said he was going to like eliminate the mob and he was going to get rid of organized crime. And this is when, during this Gemini peak period, when he was appointed as the U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York on June 3rd of 1983. So let's find June. That's another peak period on level 3. And yep, June 3rd. Okay. So again, he's having and he's in a Leo period. So he's really getting noticed. He has all those planets in Leo. He's definitely getting noticed. His star is on the rise. And during 1974, he has a peak period in Sagittarius where he becomes a federal prosecutor. And then in the Gemini peak period, he becomes a U.S. Attorney for Southern District of New York, and starts going after the mob at this time. Okay, so we've got that going on. And then we see the first loosening of the bond. Now, loosening of the bond, you'll see a little star next to the date when there's a loosening of the bond. And the loosening of the bond indicates that there's going to be a big change in this person's life or a major transition in this person's life. And loosening of the bonds sometimes happens once, two, maybe three times in a person's entire lifetime. And so this first loosening of the bond during this Leo level 1 period happens when he's 42 years old, and it happens on November 19th of 1986 and February of 1987. So during this loosening of the bond period, he has a huge win against the mob, and he gets conviction after conviction. So he's doing really well. But then a few months after that, he's criticized for arresting people with no evidence. And he's starting to get a lot of public criticism for like going overboard or doing too much. And, so we see like he reaches a height, and he gets a lot of convictions, but it's at this time that he starts to get some public criticism. And at that time, there was a loosening of the bond in Aquarius. And as we recall, Aquarius is opposite to all those Leo planets that he has. Particularly the Mars in Leo, which is the most malefic planet in the chart because he has a day chart. And so we see kind of like the first hints of public criticism, or he's going overboard with things, or he's going a little bit too hard. But at the same time, and I think at about that time is when he started thinking about running for mayor as well, because in 1989, then he ran for mayor of New York City. Now, he didn't win in 1989, but he did win in 1993. Now, so he goes through this loosening of the bond when he's 42 years old, and he gets major convictions. He prosecutes the mob. They go to prison for hundreds of years. But at the same time, he starts to get criticism for the way that he overkills everything and does everything too much. Now, when he goes into, then after that 1986 period, in 1987, October 1987, he goes into a level 1 peak period. And this happens from the time he's 43 to 63, which just means that like from the time of 1987 to April 28th of 2000, he is basically in a peak period this whole time. Actually, it's October 8th of 1987 to June 27th of 2007. He's in a heightened phase on level 1. And arguably, this is the time when he really, really started rising in his career. He became mayor at that time. And on November 3rd in 1993, he won against David Dakins and became the mayor. And that was November 3rd of 1993. Now, he was in an overall level 1 peak period at that time. But if we go to level 3, he was in a peak period at that time. And on the day of the announcement, he was also in a level 4 peak as well. So he was in a peak, or actually he was in a loosening of the bond on level 3 when he won that seat for mayor of New York City, or when he became the mayor of New York City. It was during this level 1 peak period. On November 4th of 1997, he again, and this would have been during this Pisces peak period, he won his second term as mayor during this level 2 peak period on November 4th of 1997. And November 4th, 1997, November 4th, 1997. And so we see a lot happening during this peak period for him. Like he's hitting major peaks in his career, and good things are popping off for him. Okay. So what happened? So he goes, so around this November 6th, 1999 to June 28th of 2001, during this Gemini peak period, in this time frame from 1999 to 2001, he's considering running for U.S. Senate against Hillary Clinton. And he's actually in the process of running against her, but he gets prostate cancer during it and has to drop out. Now, keep in mind, in his chart, he has Saturn in Gemini. So although he's in a peak period, Saturn is a malefic, and Saturn is also squaring his ascendant, which is in Virgo. And we talked about earlier about how sometimes his health issues, etc., have affected his career. And so while he's in this peak Gemini period, he's trying to run for U.S. Senate. His term as mayor is almost over, and he wants to run for U.S. Senate against Hillary Clinton. But on May 26, 2000, he found out that he had prostate cancer. And so at that time, when he found out he had prostate cancer, he was on a level 1, level 2, level 3 peak period as he was running for Senate, but as he found out he had cancer. On May 19th of 2000, he announced he's not running for Senate and that his health comes first, and he dropped out of the race. So that was on May 19th, and that would have also been during this peak period and during this Gemini level 4 as well. And so the May 19th peak period happened there as well when he announced, I can't keep running for office. I need to get my health back on track. Okay. So that all happened, like his whole idea to run for the Senate and his whole process with that happened during this Gemini peak period. Now, of course, then September 11th happened. And if we look at September 11th, at when that happened for him, let's see here, September 11th, it would have been like a peak period on level 4 and level 1. And he was in a Cancer phase on level 2 there. So that was when September 11th happened. But he ended up getting knighted by Queen Elizabeth, as I mentioned. And in the middle of October, which would have been on this level 3, middle of October, Queen Elizabeth announced that she was going to make him a knight because of his, not swear him in, but knight him because of his actions on September 11th. And around that peak period time as well is when Oprah started calling him America's mayor. So there was a lot going on at that time, which was also in a peak period. And, interestingly, like, we see this period. So he has his second loosening of the bond when he's 60 years old. Now, remember, I told you he had a loosening of the bond here as he started to think about running for mayor of New York City. And as he was deciding, that he was done practicing law and he was going to run for mayor. Now, this second loosening of the bond that happened for him as he was leaving this peak period happened between February 7th of 2005 and February 6th of 2006. And during this time, he was exploring a run for president of the United States. And at this time, he was doing some other consulting things. But during this period was the time that during this loosening of the bond, right, major transformations, major changes, he decided, I'm going to give it a go and I'm going to try to run for president. But his peak period was running out, as you can see. And as of June 27th, 2007, he switched over to a Libra period. And this was not a peak period for him anymore. And on January 29th, 2008, he decided to call it quits and stop his run for president. And that would have been in this Libra period here. It would have been January 29th, 2008. So if we go here, yeah, it was a third level Aquarius period. We talked about Aquarius periods being difficult for him because of all his Leo and the Mars in Leo. Yeah, so he did not win. And he did have some other peak periods here. Not level one. This was a special peak period, level one period from the time he was 43 to 63. But at the end of this Libra period, when he had a Pisces peak period on level two, is kind of when he started talking with Donald Trump about possibly advising Donald Trump on his, and actually it happened more in the spring of 2015 when he switched into the Scorpio period, when he decided to talk to Donald Trump about being his advisor. And so let's go ahead, and we're almost done here because now he has entered into a Scorpio period. He's entered into a Mars ruled period at age 71. Now, this Libra period was a lot more chill. Like, he was doing stuff, but he wasn't involved, and he was becoming less relevant, right? He was in a peak period, and the mayor of New York City, running for president, all this type of stuff. All of a sudden it stopped around 63 years old when he moved into this Libra period. And there wasn't as much going on here. Like, he had his consulting companies, but he was kind of like fading from relevancy at that time. And he was just kind of spending a lot of money at that time too. And it was a Libra period. And as we know, Libra rules his second house of money, where Neptune is. And so it was like, he was spending a lot of money. He was living the high life. He never did that before. Before that time, he never really got extravagant things or did extravagant things. It kind of was once he entered that Libra period, he started spending money, buying a lot of properties, but he wasn't in the public eye like he was when he was in that peak period before, when he was in the Virgo peak period. Now, keep in mind, Virgo is also his rising sign. So he is like front in center in a peak period. During this time, when we talked about when he ran for mayor twice and won, and then there was September 11th in 2001, and then he decided to run for president during the loosening of the bond, but nothing came of that as he moved into the Libra period, and he kind of faded out of the spotlight. Now, when he entered into a level one Scorpio period in May of 2015, when he was 71 years old, is when he and Trump started talking, and Trump was exploring a run for president or starting to get into it. And Rudy started to talk about it more. And so we see the scorpionic period that he's been in has been, because he's 79 right now. So he's still in this scorpionic level one period, which is ruled by Mars. Now, if we keep in mind, let's look at his chart, right? Because Mars is the ruler of his third house of, basically like the media and the news about him and all of that, which has exploded and been extremely malefic ever since he attached his wagon to Donald Trump. And as we know, Mars is the most difficult planet in the chart. And because it's a night chart, Mars is going to be, or a day chart, Mars is going to be the number one malefic. And so anytime we get, Aries, or we get Scorpio, or we get into Aries periods or Scorpio periods, it's going to be intense, right? With the Mars, Pluto, Rahu conjunction in the 12th house, this is an intense period. And it's happening when he's 71 years old. And it's more of this martial fight, fight, fight energy that people don't really need, frankly, as they're 71 years old, but yet he's engaging in it. And this is where things really started to fall apart for him, particularly after his friend died in July of 2016. It was July 7th of 2016. So let's find that. July 7th of 2016. Yeah. So July 7th of 2016, his best friend, again, a Scorpio period, a tough period for him, the opening of this Scorpio period. His friend passed away and his friend passed away. And so there's that. Now, so he's in this difficult Scorpio period, and I just want to okay, so I want to show you guys something. Now, remember earlier when I talked about the movie Borat? It was the Borat movie. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Borat, but it was Sacha Baron Cohen's, he'll fake interview politicians and pretend to be interested in them and get them to say and do weird things. He did this with Rudy Giuliani with this girl, and Rudy Giuliani started laying down on this hotel bed and digging around in his pants, and it was all being taped for this spoof basically. And this movie aired on October 23rd of 2020, of Rudy Giuliani with this girl who's supposed to be 15 years old, interviewing him and is hero worshiping him. And he kind of lays down on the bed in front of her. And Sacha Baron Cohen jumps out of the closet to be stop, stop, but he catches him in this very strange and awkward moment. And Sacha Baron Cohen, the creator of the movie, actually keeps the film or keeps the clip in the movie. And the movie comes out on October 23rd of 2020. Now, what's really interesting, if we look at October 3rd of 2020, let's see, October 3rd of 2020. Okay, so he's in a peak period on level 3. He's in an Aquarius level 2 in the Scorpio period. Tough energy, okay, very tough energy. But then he's got this peak period where he's up in the news. And then on October 23rd of 2020, look at this on level 4. Okay, so the movie was released on October 23rd of 2020. On the day that that movie Borat movie was released, where Rudy Giuliani is doing very weird things in his pants with supposedly a very young girl. He thought she was young, but she still was young. She was in reality 24, but in the movie she played a 15-year-old. And so he's caught digging around in his pants. And that movie premieres during a loosening of the bond peak period. The actual day that movie comes out is a level 4 peak period, loosening of the bond. So that is also very fascinating to me, because that was a hugely embarrassing moment. And I don't know if he registered that as an embarrassing moment because of all the drinking and the lying to himself and all of that. But the public was oh my God, when that movie came out, and it was right before that 2020 election. And, as all that stuff was going on in 2020, he was in a level 1 Scorpio period. It was a Mars period, toughest planet for him. It was also in an Aquarius planet, opposing all of his Leo planets. Tough time for him. Tough energy going on, humiliating time for him. And he's still actually in this time period. Right now, he's in a level 1, still this level 1 Scorpio period. But as of April 4th of 2023, he's been on a level 2 Aries period. And as we mentioned earlier, Aries rules his 8th house of debt, bankruptcy, things that would go on with debt. And so again, even in the zodiacal releasing, we see another level 2 reference to this 8th house in this Mars, which rules the 8th house, and he is in a Scorpio period. And so this is a very tough time for him, and his 8th house is highlighted, and he's getting a Pluto opposition, and he's getting a transit to his nodes in Pluto and his Mars in Leo. And a lot is going on here, guys. And I hope I gave you enough information to kind of really maybe understand it. I know the zodiacal releasing is a more challenging technique, and it is a difficult technique, and it's a little bit harder to explain in this medium, particularly if you have like not a background in astrology. But I just wanted to show you like the transits, the perfections, and the zodiacal releasing are all kind of pointing back to that eighth house at this time, at this period. And it's not good news for him. He has declared bankruptcy, and we will see what happens in the future with Neptune opposing his ascendant and Saturn opposing his Chiron and squaring his sun. Like, I am worried about his health. I don't know how he's going to survive through this. We don't want anyone to like pass away or anything, but his health, to me, his health is looking very rough according to the transits that are like his physical health going on right now too. And I know he's done a lot of bad things, and it's time, like, he's got to pay up now. And unfortunately, it's happening when he's like almost 80 years old, which is not great. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and leave the reading there. I hope you guys enjoyed the reading, and I would love to hear any of your thoughts or your comments or your feedback on the reading. Thank you so much, beautiful souls, and I hope you have a wonderful beginning to your